Which version do you like best? That's what I want to know today. Let me explain. In today's video, I'll be using 6 cheap and easy to find items, things that you probably already have around the house. And then I'll show you 2 different DIY projects using each of those items. I've included some of my most popular fall DIYs and several completely new ideas that I've never tried before. For example, I came up with an easy no-sew way to make an adorable sweater or fabric pumpkin. I can't wait to show you. So let's get started. I thought I'd make a candle stand from a piece of driftwood that I'd had in my garage for quite a while. I found the center and then marked out 5 evenly spaced spots. I drilled a hole in each spot using a 1-inch spade drill bit. If you don't have access to driftwood, you could really drill holes in just any old piece of wood. To update some old candles that I had, I melted down a thrifted pillar candle, adding 1 orange and 1 brown crayon to the wax to give it a caramely color. I then dipped each of the taper candles into the colored wax, lifting them out and letting the wax dry for a second or two, and then re-dipping them 2 or 3 times. I also dipped the base of the candle in the wax so that the candle would stand up straight in the drilled hole. I had plenty of colored wax, so I dipped a second set of candles because it was a good way to hide the stains on these old candles. The candle stand looked a bit plain for my taste, and so I cut up a fake bittersweet stem and arranged it around the candles. This time I'm going to make a unique candle stand for a large pillar candle. I found a scrap piece of plywood and used some sandpaper to smooth down the edges. Then I printed out this autumn poem in a size to fit my piece of wood. I applied Mod Podge to one side of the wood and to the back side of the poem, and then adhered the two together, carefully smoothing out any wrinkles or bubbles. I cut off the excess paper, and when the Mod Podge was dry, I went around the edges lightly with some sandpaper. I pulled a faux vine from a thrifted floral arrangement and covered a small damaged area with some brown florist tape. Then I pulled off the blossoms and berries from some Dollar Tree bittersweet and hot glued them to various spots on the vine. At first, I was going to use a thrifted glass vase upside down as a cloche, but then I decided to use it right side up instead. First, I added some moss to the bottom of the vase. Then I added a plastic pumpkin, my bittersweet vine, and my autumn poem. I had a second thrifted glass vase, slightly smaller than the first, that I was going to use to hold my pillar candle. I hot glued some lace around the bottom of the second vase. The reason I decided not to turn the bottom vase over like a cloche was because I had discovered that the smaller vase fit perfectly atop the larger one. For the next project, you'll need some old tin cans and some cabinet knobs. I decided to paint my tin cans with some ivory chalk paint, but you could leave them plain. I distressed them a bit after the paint was dry. I measured the cans to decide what size labels I needed to make. I've linked my labels in the description box below. I applied Mod Podge to the back of the labels and adhered them to my tin cans. Paint your knobs orange. I used pumpkin-colored chalk paint, but you could use spray paint. Cut pieces of stick to fit in the screw hole, or you could just paint the screw brown. Hot glue some Spanish moss around the stick or screw. I also like to glue on a fake leaf from my floral scraps. As a finishing touch, I like to take a piece of paper-wrapped florist wire and wrap it around my needle nose pliers or a pencil to create a ringlet, and then attach that to the stem as well. Then I fill each of my tin cans with some packing styrofoam and then top it off with Excelsior. Then add your knobs and any other embellishments you'd like. For this tin can project, I'm going to be trying out a new product that I just saw at Dollar Tree. First, I gave my tin cans a couple coats of black chalk paint. I found these rub-on transfers that look like farm wood in the stickers section at Dollar Tree. I cut them down to fit the side of my tin cans. I used a plastic tool to rub the transfer onto the can. I should tell you that it did take a while for the transfer to adhere to the can and release itself from the clear cover. These transfers aren't very large either, so I used most of an entire sheet just covering one small can. I hot glued the two cans together along the seam where the transfer didn't quite completely cover the can. And then I added some Gorilla Glue for a long-term, more permanent hold. To attach a handle, I drilled two small holes along the center top edge of the cans, and then flipped the cans over and did the same thing on the back side. I ran a long wood bead through two strands of wire, and then ran the ends of each piece of wire through the holes that I had drilled at the top of the cans. I used some needle nose pliers to twist a little circle at the end of each piece of wire so that it wouldn't get pulled through the hole. As you can see, I didn't wait until the Gorilla Glue was dry, so I had to glue the cans together a second time. Then I added some packing styrofoam, and instead of adding pumpkins this time, I decided to add faux sunflowers, which I thought would look really good against the fake barnwood. I covered the styrofoam with some Spanish moss and finished it off with a yellow gingham bow. What better way to add autumn decor to your kitchen than to upcycle an old or broken kitchen appliance? This coffee grinder was missing some of its parts, but I thought it would be super cute filled with some miniature pumpkins. The wood was pretty scratched up, so I gave it a couple coats of ivory chalk paint, and when the paint was dry, I distressed it a bit with some sandpaper. I painted some cheap plastic gourds and pumpkins in a couple different colors of coordinating chalk paint. Like I did with the knobs, I replaced the plastic stems with pieces of stick and hot glued a bit of Spanish moss to the top of each gourd. I hot glued some styrofoam into the coffee grinder and then attached the pumpkins and gourds to the styrofoam using pieces of skewer sticks. I filled in around the pumpkins with some fake leaves and more Spanish moss. The coffee grinder was already pretty cute on its own, so to put a new twist on a kitchen appliance, I thought I would use something a little more utilitarian, like a meat grinder. To add a little rust, I let it soak in some toilet bowl cleaner for a few hours, and then I rinsed it off and added some styrofoam into the opening at the top. I added 2 large flowers from a thrifted arrangement and then filled in with some greenery from that same arrangement. I also added some stems and some pumpkin picks from Dollar Tree. I filled in any empty spots with Spanish moss and added a lace bow made from Dollar Tree ribbon. For the next project, I wanted to make use of this little wooden wheelbarrow that I've had in my stash for quite a while. I gave it 2 coats of dark brown chalk paint and then distressed it a bit with sandpaper. I printed out 2 pumpkin labels from the Graphics Fairy and applied one to each side of the wheelbarrow using Mod Podge. I rubbed some sandpaper over some small terracotta pots that I had to make them look a bit more aged. I hammered a nail set through the holes to make them larger, then hot glued a small stick in each hole. I also glued on some leaves and Spanish moss to the top of each terracotta pot. I put the pots in the wheelbarrow and then stuffed Excelsior all around. The pots held firmly in place. I only needed to hot glue one of the pots that kept falling out the end. I had this little bonsai rake, so I stuck it in the wheelbarrow too. For a new take on terracotta pots, I decided I wanted to try to age them using gardening lime. I mixed the lime with water in a disposable plastic bowl at about a 50-50 ratio and stirred it until the small granules dissolved. Then I spread the mixture over my terracotta pots and let them dry. You might want to spread a lighter coat of lime on your pots than I did because it took a couple days before they completely dried. I even went ahead and sanded them down before they were dry to achieve a weathered look that I liked. If you want to seal your lime and keep it from rubbing off, spray your pots with a clear matte top coat. Then add some styrofoam to your pots and add some fake flowers. Since arrangements of 3 always look good, I used 2 large faux flowers pulled from a thrifted arrangement and 1 faux pumpkin. Then I added some ivy leaves, also pulled from a thrifted arrangement, and then filled in any empty spots with Spanish moss. For the next project, cut the sleeves off of an old sweater and then cut the sleeves into thirds or fourths depending on the size of pumpkins that you want. You'll have 3 or 4 little sweater tubes. Turn one of the tubes inside out. Sew a basic in and out gathering stitch along the edge of the larger end of the tube. Pull the thread until the end of the sweater gathers up as tightly as possible without breaking your thread. And then run a few stitches back and forth through your end to make sure that the gathering holds in place. Turn your sweater tube right side out and then fill it with pillow stuffing or dried beans. Once your pumpkin is filled, run a gathering stitch along the top edge of the sweater, pull the thread tight, and run a few extra stitches to make sure that the gathering holds in place. Carefully open the hole a bit, insert a small stick, and hot glue it in place. With a new piece of thread, run a few stitches right next to the stick so that the thread is firmly planted in the sweater. Then run a long stitch from next to the stick to the bottom center of your pumpkin. Feed the needle through your pumpkin, coming out at the top next to the stick. Repeat this process 4 more times, evenly spreading those long stitches around the perimeter of the pumpkin. Now you're ready to add embellishments. I like to add leaves, vines, little berries, and of course, Spanish moss. And now, as promised, I'm going to show you a super easy way to make sweater pumpkins that requires absolutely no sewing. Using pliers, pull the stem off of a Dollar Tree fake leather pumpkin. You may want to cut the hole a little larger. Then cut a section off of your sweater sleeve large enough to completely cover your pumpkin. Push one end of the sleeve piece into the opening created when you removed the stem. Then flip the pumpkin over and begin gluing the other end of the sweater to the bottom of the pumpkin with hot glue. Try to create little pleats by gathering up the fabric with your fingers. This way it won't look overly bulky and will still sit flat and upright. Next, cut a long strand of twine and wrap it tightly around your pumpkin. Twist the 2 ends of the twine around each other and wrap around the pumpkin again 2 more times. Then tie the twine tightly at the top center of the pumpkin. Space the twine evenly around the pumpkin. Once you've tied a knot in the twine at the top of your pumpkin, unwind the remaining twine to create a rustic effect. Put some hot glue in the hole in the top of the pumpkin and insert a piece of stick for your stem. Add any other embellishments that you like. I added a leaf and the top portion from a Dollar Tree butterfly sticker. I also added a small flower that I found in my stash. This next project uses a small thrifted oval frame. Find a piece of fabric in autumn colors that will fit inside your frame, and then paint it in a color that coordinates with your piece of fabric. I painted mine with 2 coats of brown chalk paint. Then I distressed it a bit and applied a coat of clear wax. Using the piece of glass from the frame as a template, I cut out my piece of fabric. I then folded over the edges and hot glued them to the back of the piece of glass. Then I hot glued the cardboard picture to the back of the glass, which will also help to hold the folded fabric in place. Finally, I reattached the back of the frame. I drilled a large hole in the center of one side of the frame and then inserted a stick from my yard. I hot glued some raffia and a few autumn leaves to the stem, and then I hot glued some Scrabble letters onto the fabric to spell out the word autumn. For the next project, I'm using some small picture frames from Dollar Tree, but you could use any picture frame just by removing the glass. Cut decorative paper to fit inside your frame. You could use wrapping paper, scrapbook paper, or vintage dictionary pages. I used glue stick to adhere my paper inside my frames. I measured and marked the center of the frame and then drilled 2 small holes near that center mark. Then I thread a small piece of florist wire through those 2 holes, creating a small loop on the front side of the frame. I cut a small bunch of Dollar Tree dried flowers to fit inside the frame and then inserted them into the loop of florist wire. Then I twisted the wire tight on the back of the frame to hold the flowers in place. I thread some letter beads onto a long strand of twine and then drilled 2 small holes on either side of my flower bunch to thread the twine through. I had to use a darning needle to get the twine to fit through the small hole, so if I did this again, I would probably just thread the beads on a piece of florist wire. If you can't find dried flowers at your Dollar Tree, you could just cut some dried flowers or even weeds from your yard. I actually liked these the best. The house frame didn't come with a hanger, so I just made my own with a piece of twine and some beads and stapled it to the back.
I hope you enjoyed today's projects, and I hope you'll let me know which version did you like best. Thank you so very much for watching, and I hope to see you next Monday. Bye-bye for now.